It is 9 o'clock. If we could have everybody please take a seat so we can get started, that'd be appreciated. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, welcome. We're going to get going here. My name is Kelsey Doom. I'm the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce President and CEO. Thank you all for being here. Today we have districts 4 and 7. It'll go till 10:30, not 10 o'clock. And then next Saturday we will have just the one district, and we'll probably go an hour and a half as well, just because it's the last one and there's so much action happening. So without further ado, I'll introduce our moderator, Mike Bartley.
We're shuffling quickly here. Thank you for the introduction. Before we start with our legislators here in District 7 and 4, I'd like to introduce Senator Reynold Nessa, the Minority Whip, and he has a couple of comments and a seminar after this.
Great.
Senator?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Kelsey, for inviting us and putting this together. So I am Reynold Nessa. There are Democrats in Pierre, although you don't see any behind me today. But we do have we'll have sort of a Democratic response. If you want to have different answers or hear different answers to the questions, we're going to be doing that over at the Brookings Activity Center, which is right behind the library from about 10:30 until noon. And will we have coffee over there too? We're going to try to have some coffee over there. So I'm Reynold Nessa. I serve on the Joint Committee on Appropriations and on Retirement Law and on Procedures. And this is the end of my second term there, and I do plan to run again. So thank you for inviting me up here today, and I hope some of you can come over, and I hope you all can join us over at 10:30 to 12 over at the Activity Center. So thanks. And then last word, representative democracy really is not a spectator sport, and so I'm really glad that you're here participating in this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. A politician who was brief, you gotta like it. It was good. All right, we'll start this morning's forum. We have both District 7 and 4 here today, so we'll have a lot of responses from these people. So we've told them that they have to keep their remarks to 2 or 3 minutes for opening and two minutes to respond to each of the questions, so everybody gets a chance to answer it if they want to, and that's the way we work it. Please write your questions down, send them up to the end as a runner. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. There may be some that are duplicates. I'll try and put like 3 of these are the same one together and try and make one question out of it for the senators and representatives up here. So if you at least if you know the bill number, Senate bill or House bill number on it, that will help us. Dan Nelson over here to my left is trying to pull the bills up on the screen so you can take a look at them. Now some of them are 19 pages long, so you're not going to be able to read them all, but at the same time give you an idea of what the bill is. Also give these people up here a chance to look it up and decide what it's all about. So for that, I'm going to start immediately to my right and go this way around the table. So we'll start with Senator Wick with opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce, Kelsey, Dan Nelson for your help today. We appreciate being here, and thank all of you for showing up. I actually agree and work a lot with the good Senator Nessa from Sioux Falls, and we work together very well, and he's right. This is not a spectator sport, so we appreciate you being involved and here and paying attention, and we do appreciate all the emails we get, even if we don't get a chance to answer them. Well, my name is John Wick. I am a state senator representing rural Brookings County, along with rural Coddington County, Grant and Dual counties also. I live in Big Stone City, South Dakota, and it is my pleasure to be here today. I've got a few legislative priorities this year. Mainly the ones we're still working on are move over awareness and move over laws, and adding the color blue as an optional color for tow trucks along the side of the road. That's what my family does. We operate a towing business. And a friend of ours was killed alongside the road in Watertown on January 4th. And it was just one of those horrible accidents where I think if He could have somehow been more visible. Maybe there's a chance the other driver could have seen him and moved out of the way in time. And mainly, we're just trying to increase awareness of our state's existing move-over laws, and I'm trying to offer a little bit of clarity with some work I'm doing with the Department of Public Safety and the Sheriff's Association, along with a lot of other tow truck owners and drivers from around the state. Our other priority this year that's been just got through Senate Appropriations yesterday was the Dakotas Promise Scholarship. We've been working on that last year. We put together a pretty good attempt, but it just wasn't successful. We listened to a lot of the reasons why it failed. I think we have a better bill moving forward, and I hope to see Dakotas Promise come to light this year. So with that, I look forward to your questions, and thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Mills, opening remarks.
Good morning. I'm Representative John Mills. I serve the same district as the good senator to my left. He's up in the northeast corner, and I live south of Volga out in the country. Also want to acknowledge Representative Fred Deutsch, who is not here today. He serves our district as well. He lives up near the little town of Florence, northwest of Watertown, so we've kind of got three corners of the large district covered between us. Fred, some of you may know, others may not, that his wife is battling cancer, and so he has had to be home with her. She's had surgery. They're evaluating what their options are going forward, but he's got his priorities straight. He's been in Pierre about 1 day a week. I think he's planning to come this week for crossover day, which is a big crunch time for us, but I know he would love to be here. He loves the work, but he does have his priorities straight, and so I'm thankful for that. So I serve on a taxation committee in the House, and I chair the transportation committee in the House. And transportation, in fact, the issue that Senator Wick mentioned, the blue light issue, came through our committee on kind of a split vote, but that bill has been improved since then, had some more work done on it, which happens to all these bills as they go through the process. And now when it comes to the House floor, I believe I will be able to support it. And so we're following that one on through its progress. I also, just to kind of share briefly, I have a passion to cure our state's addiction to video lottery. And I had two bills up yesterday that I was working intensely on, and they came to a deadlock in committee, 6-6 vote. And they were unable to leave them there, and so unfortunately I would say they sent them to the 41st day. So for the time being anyway, my effort to cure our state's addiction to that plague, as I see it, remains yet to be done. But with that, I'm glad that all of you are here. It was fun to see the smiling, engaged conversation, and I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this. It's a great event, and thank you all, and we'll look for your questions.
Thank you. Our senior representative, Tim Reed.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the Chamber for putting this event on. And it's just great to see such a large audience 2 years in a row, or two of these in a row. And so I know we got a lot of questions to get to. We didn't get to all of them last week. So, we're got 3 weeks left. Hard to believe. We've got crossover day coming up next Thursday, so we'll be very busy getting the bills out of the original chamber. I think the committees have been working through the bills pretty good. We'll have a few longer committee sessions on Monday to get that completed. And next week, I think we'll start. We got two appropriators here, which is always nice to have. I think we'll get a good understanding of where we're going to be at, with the ongoing and the one-time funds. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that next week. Some of my priorities, some bills that I have that I'm working on. One of them was a resolution that came out of summer interim task force, and that is to ask the state to investigate peer support services for mental health and addiction services. And that one, it just has to be completed on the Senate floor. It's done very well each step of the way. It got through Senate Health and Human Services yesterday, so it'll be on the Senate floor here soon. Another one is campus brewing is what we're calling it, with the popularity of brew pubs and such, and then wine and farm wineries. Well, both mines and SDSU wanted to have the ability to be able to brew beer, brew wine, distilled spirits on campus, and that one is on its way to the governor's desk. And I was working closely with her, so I'm guessing that'll be signed. Then I had three bills that had to do with sexual assault examinations. One was to increase the time for storage of anonymous kits to 7 years, from 1 year to 7 years. And that one is sitting on the governor's desk. It did very well through all the steps. Also, the ability for a 16-year-old to give consent. Today, you have to be 18 years old because it's considered a medical procedure. And so we got that down to 16 years old because that is, it's sad numbers, but 47% of the cases for forcible rape is with somebody under the age of 18. And then a third one was if somebody is a protected person, maybe has a disability, also to allow them to consent without their guardian's permission. And most of those folks know, as long as the doctor says you understand what's going to happen to you, you can give consent, and then they do it. So hopefully we'll touch on the municipality issue too. If there's a question for that, I'll have an update on that. And the other exciting thing that is getting started and will be on the House floor is a bioprocessing initiative. And that's to get a bioprocessing facility, and it'll probably be at the research park, and it's basically some planning funds for that. So I look forward to getting that one through the House floor on Monday. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Senator V.J. Smith.
Thanks, Mike. I'm not feeling very well. I caught something on Thursday, and I fell asleep in caucus for an hour, which probably was an okay thing. But here's how bad it was. I was so thirsty when I woke up, I drank a bottle of water that had the USD label on it. Things are tough. Anyway, but there is a benefit of illness, and that is when you tell a lobbyist that you're ill, they stay with you for about 5 seconds. So anyway, I'm not going to shake anybody's hands on the way out, okay? But bear with me. Right now, the two bills that I have pending that are still alive are very important. And the first one is the wildlife habitat bill. As more and more land gets leased, or there are pay operations or whatever, the only place left for the average person happens to be the public areas. And they're not doing well. And those public areas are population exploding wildlife areas. That's where a lot of critters are born and hang out. And every person in this state has a vested interest in the health of those game production areas. We all do. Whether you hunt or not, because of what's born there and lives there. And so that's going in. It's going to be heard Tuesday morning in the House Ag. And I sure hope they see the wisdom in the bill. Again, we all have a vested interest. And the second one, I haven't seen scheduled yet, but it's the driver's exams in Spanish. And, I'm excited every time I think I get to go talk about that. Yesterday on the Senate floor, we talked about Senate Bill 157, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but I reminded those people who voted for that particular measure yesterday, for those large livestock areas, that a lot of the people that will be going to work there, they aren't white guys from Woonsocket. They're going to be people who are recent immigrants that all they want to do is get to work. And so if it doesn't fly this year, I hope it flies next year. Just one more thing, because I see I got 14 seconds left. When you send an email to any one of us, and I know I speak for all of us, make sure you have your address on there, because we are getting inundated with emails. And we have no idea where they're coming from. Michigan or Mission or whatever it is. Don't just say vote no against this. That isn't helpful. Say why. But the big thing is, keep it pithy. Get to your point. Don't bloviate. Tell us exactly why we should vote a certain way. And I'm reminded, and I see I've got 0 seconds left, but I'm but But I'm often reminded as we go through that old saying that nothing is safe when the legislature is meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Poster, opening remarks.
Thank you. I want to, I caught something that he's got too or something, I don't know, but mine's affecting my voice. I don't think VJ's voice is probably like Superman or something, but.
I haven't kissed you.
There's a big hall between us. First off, I'd just like to start by my wife is actually able to make it here this morning. We got chores done a little bit early, so she's able to come along. So I'd just like to thank you, Ginger, for being able to come along and all the support you give me all through the week. I wouldn't be able to do it without being able to phone home and see why I'm doing this. I just check in with the family and those type of things. Most of my time is taken up with appropriations work yet, and we're continuing to power through there and find out where these dollars are going and which bills are coming through and monitoring a lot of that and seeing where they're going. One of the bills that I'm really watching and following and going to be helping to promote as much as possible is the Senate Bill 157 now that's coming to our side. This bill could make a lot of difference for South Dakota as far as improving our economic viability, and we touched on it somewhat last week, and a lot of what I had heard about is found to be true. I think it'll really help our state grow economically through the areas that we have the most resources for. Another bill the one bill that I'm still working on is a bill that's trying to improve voter participation in our school board elections. And that'll be heard on Monday in House Ed. It's an idea to take our school board elections to the November general elections. Because right now, there's some school districts where there's 4% and 5% turnout, and education is way too important to have that low of a voter participation in these issues. So I would, with that, I won't push my limit all the way to the end of the clock. Thank you.
Thank you. So we only had one that went over. All right. How this is going to work is I'll try and I thank you for the questions. You know, this forum is supposed to be over at 10:30, and we might run a little long. If we get to every one of these questions and ask them, we'll be here till 10:30 tomorrow morning, so we appreciate you asking. Angie Borsma is up here trying to put them in categories, so we'll try and one question out of 4 questions on the same sort of bill, so that's how it sort of works. How it works with the representatives and the senators, if they have a possession on a particular bill or have signed to a bill, they'll indicate that and take the first crack at it, and then everybody will have an opportunity to speak if they would like to. Each of the representatives, the senators, they don't have to if they don't have any comments. So we'll get started. Some of these questions are from last week. The hot one, obviously, is Senate Bill 157. This was mentioned by 2 people. And the Senate Bill 57 revolves around zoning ordinances and conditional uses and restrictions on CAFOs that are in the current ordinances or the process for getting those approved. I think we all have a couple of different points of view up here. Most of the comments I have here are opposed to it. One is pro for it, and so we'll open that up with any one of you that would like to start at 157. Senator Wick, you may.
Thank you very much. I voted for 157. This has been obviously an issue here in northeast South Dakota and all along the I-29 corridor. And I think part of the Senate floor debate that came out of it yesterday may have been some of the best I'd heard. It was Senator Schoenbeck, actually out of Watertown, that said the problem we're getting into is the emotions of siting versus the laws of zoning. Now, zoning should be done long before anybody wants to bring a project into your area. That should be set up, and it should be fair. So if somebody wants to invest in your county, they know the rules. They're going to be able to have rules that can stand by. And when it comes to citing the project, we follow the zoning rules. So Senate Bill 157 is just another way to encourage counties to get their zoning done ahead of time so we don't have big fights when it comes to citing projects. If you want a zone where you don't have to ever see a windmill, Lincoln County's got that one figured out. They're going to make sure you never see one in Lincoln County. And you know what? Now a wind developer isn't even going to try it. But he knows ahead of time before he invests a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of lawyers, and a whole bunch of time. So I think before we get wrapped up in the emotion of 157, just remember it's the difference between getting your zoning done ahead of time so you don't have these emotional fights when it comes to siting. And that's what Senate Bill 157 is. Just get the zoning done so we have the rules going into a siting issue.
Thank you, Senator. Any other remarks? All of you.
I'll weigh in
Mills.
quickly. I'm still learning about Senate Bill 157. I appreciate the senator's remarks. I would agree with those comments. I was listening on my drive home last night, actually, to the committee testimony on 157, knowing that it was headed to the House and wanting to just get wiser about it. I'm going to obviously have to go back now and listen to the Senate testimony on the floor as well, and get smart that way. I have some questions and concerns about it from what I heard last night, and so I'm going to be watching that. I think when we're dealing with something that does have an emotional component with it, that it's important we get the law right. And just because this is a governor's bill does not make it a perfect bill. And I'm confident that as it goes through the House, if it needs some changes or tweaks to make it better, we'll do that if we can. So I'm looking forward to the debate and appreciate any and all input on this one.
Representative Reed.
Thank you. I'm also in the middle of studying it. I learned quite a bit about it. There's a lot of parts that I know I do like. I'll back up a little bit. I remember my first year out in the legislature, and somebody was just going over an issue that they had, and I said, well, zoning should take care of that. And they laughed at me because how many counties actually aren't zoned? And so I do believe in what Senator Wick said, that zoning is the answer you need for this. So the work needs to be done up front. That's when, if you're going to have an issue with, or you want to have a say in on how things should be zoned, then you got to get in there early, or what are the special permitted uses and things like that. So you get that set up, and then people know if they're going to come in with a business, they're going to do something, they know what the rules are. There's a few things in there that I found so far that I really like, and the clarifications on the days for decisions to be made. Again, if someone's coming in and there is an appeal for what they're doing, they should know how long it's going to take and when they're going to have an answer. The concept of special permitted uses, as long as you get your input on it, I think that's a good concept to have, but that's only, like if the counties decide to use them. They have the choice. Now the people have a say on that. And then the whole idea of people coming in with lawsuits that really don't have a standing. I don't think that's fair to a business either. So those are three things I like, but as Representative Mills said, this has to come through the House, and there could be some tweaks that need to be made to make it good for everybody.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thanks, Mike. I spoke yesterday about this issue briefly on the floor of the Senate. As I said there, I was horribly conflicted right to the end. In fact, I was the last one to vote. I had passed the first time. And the reason why is because of the emotional part that Senator Wick has talked about. It's a tough deal because when you know some of the people who are directly involved, and where I came down on the yes vote happened to be this idea of obviously Senator Schoenbeck's, but it was more, it brings about uniformity and it brings about a process, and there are no questions. This is the roadmap. This is how we get here, because some people were taking it to the extreme, and I understand from the other side, because I got so many emails, and right at the end when we're voting, I am handed a note, a message. Somebody had called in and said, vote no on 157. Right up to the end, people were reaching out. This is what I know about the large operations. And this is where I'm conflicted. Would I want one across the street from me? Probably not. But I know that we need to help feed a growing world. And I know that employment opportunities with this are enormous. and keeping young farmers in South Dakota, and also the people who arrive here and looking for work. This is where the part of the conflict came from, because I knew that the Brookings Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Group fully supported the concept. I had reached out to every member of the Brookings County Commission and asked their thoughts, and they provided them. And there were some small adjustments that some of them suggested, but I knew for the most part, people were, other than a few slight objections, people were for it. And so in the end, when I had to vote, it was a tough one. It was one of those moments like, I wish somebody could be here voting for me right now. Mom? But I had to stand up and say yes to 157. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Post, comments?
I believe everybody's covered pretty much everything that I've seen in the bill as well. I'd just like to elaborate a little bit. One of the most contentious parts that I've heard about is the switch from 2/3 to majority vote. And the interesting thing about that is a majority of the approving body could go back and change the law, but it takes 2/3 to say that you've actually met the law. And so that's kind of an archaic thing that ended up in the law because of a different situation back in prior law. And so that's one of the areas that you hear a lot. It's like, well, why'd they change that? But it just was kind of silly to have that 2/3 requirement there when you could change the law with a simple majority. But yeah, it's already been mentioned that someone that's actually has aggrieved is a big deal, because some of the situations where we have cases filed against these projects, they're coming from out of state, they're coming from another region of the state, and they're filing against a project that's in Hamlin County, and their organization is out of Yankton County. So it defines that better. A lot of it is just narrowing up the time frame so that things can't be drug out. The biggest thing that's going to help with that is that your permit clock doesn't start until after all appeals are done. Because otherwise, that was the game that was being played, is that, well, we know we can drag this out in the courts until their permit expires, and then they have to go get a new permit. And so it really just kind of cleans up the process so that everybody knows what the time frames are and what the availability is for these type of things. And I guess the bottom line for me is still that us as a state, to be economically viable, have to use the resources we have in this state. And that's the key to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next bill or subject. It's House Bill 1266 and Senate Bill 147. Both of these bills address collective bargaining with the university and the Board of Regents. And some of the questions that we got here, some are in opposition, some are in favor of, but they would like to know each of your positions on this particular bills. Again, it was House Bill 1266 and Senate Bill 147. Who would like to start? Senator Smith.
Very quickly, I addressed this last week, but so you're going to hear the same thing you heard last week. But when this whole idea of Kohi was being discussed back in the 70s, people felt if we allowed it, the world was going to end. And here we are all these years later, we're still operating. And so I see no problem with collective bargaining agreements from the university. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments? Representative Reed?
Yeah, I spoke about this last week also, and it's good to have somebody that can give you the history of it, because I think I was playing kickball when VJ was watching this. Just once in a while I get to do that, because he usually gets me first. But it's true. I think things are operating okay this way, and you have to remember this isn't about the actual salary. That isn't the negotiation part in that. So I think the process is working as it sits today.
Senator Wick?
Well, thank you. I voted, believe me, I got in the middle of this, and I've done a lot of research with this, and I've talked to a lot of people, and I see Senator Tiedemann is here, and I was his vice chair when this came through before and failed on the Senate floor, but it failed even regardless of my positive vote. I watched a lot of contentious fights in other states, and I support South Dakota's right to work state, and generally speaking, when unions are involved in government relations, they make me uncomfortable. And yes, it has worked, and I don't see any great problems with the way things are going in South Dakota, but I think this is something that is evolving and is beginning a nationwide push, and my name's on the bill, so I will support Senate Bill 147 as written so far.
Any other comments from anyone? All right, thank you. We'll move on to our next one, which is House Bill 1198 and Senate Bill 170. These bills both refer to repealing provisions regarding the maximum taxes levied by the school board of a school district for the capital outlay fund. And the questions are basically is, do you support the bill? How do you fund education if you don't support this bill, or how do you want to fund education? So again, Senate Bill 170 and House Bill 1198. Has anybody signed onto that bill or committee? Representative Reed?
I guess I'll go first. I haven't looked, specifically at the bill, though I've been in discussions with the prime sponsor a little bit on it, and we do have an issue with schools having enough funds, and the capital outlay, taxes that are paid for that, is something that the school board can decide how much it should be, and so I don't see any problem with giving them more flexibility when it comes to the amount of money that can be raised.
Representative Mills?
Yeah, I'm in support of this bill. I think the funding formula that we came up with in 2016 just doesn't fit every school district all the time, and we do need to do what we can to give flexibility. And so while this bill hasn't made it anywhere yet, at this time, I'm planning to support it.
Any other comments? Senator Wick?
Well, thank you. I've been involved in a lot of discussions on school funding, especially small schools this year. I had a bill that failed, Senate Bill 111, that would have kept wind energy, a portion of wind energy in the local district because of a bunch of reasons I thought I explained pretty well on the floor. However, there's a lot of ongoing discussions about the freedom of small districts, especially to use their limited resources how they see fit. And I haven't seen anything in the bill that came out of, I'm looking at Senate Bill 170 because that's the one I'm more interested in first. But that's the one I'm probably going to have to vote on Monday or Tuesday. And as it stands right now, going from the 2,800 to 3,400, looks like something I'll probably support. I haven't had a chance to dig into it too thoroughly yet, but as it stands right now, it's just a little bit more flexibility for especially the smaller districts to hold things together, and especially in the wind energy areas where they get the 5 years of growth for the new wind farms before it starts to taper off. It just gives them more opportunities to move the money around where it'll do the most good.
Thank you. Senator Smith?
Thanks, Mike. Senator Wismer from Britain spoke in the Education Committee the other day, and she had some strong words. Here's the reality of South Dakota. We have 149 school districts. 149. They have 39 in Wyoming. And I can't remember if I shared this last week. I probably did. Forgive me, but in one district in the state, in the last 8 years, there are 14 communities in that district, and 12 of those towns have built schools. That's unsupportable. It just flat is. It's not even thinking about reality, because the small towns in South Dakota are not growing. And my hometown of Eureka has gone from 1,500 people to 750. graduating class of 64, and now we graduate 10. A few years ago, they had 4 in the senior class, 3 boys and a girl, and so by default, she became homecoming queen. That's true. And so there is going to have to be some type of summit by a courageous leader or leaders as to what we're going to do, because we got to do something, because it's not going to work. It's not working now, especially for the small schools. And we got to figure out how to get it done. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. We'll move on to our next question. It's on House Bill 1251, which apparently creates a new Board of Regents with 5 members appointed by the governor, I believe. And there are some people thinking that this is a governor's power grab and doesn't solve any problems. So anybody on House Bill 1251, Board of Regents? Representative Reed.
I'll start with that. A lot of concerns with this bill, and I don't know if that's a correct statement. I don't think this was from the governor's office. Looking at the sponsors and such, I don't think this has come from, I don't have a confirmation on where they stand on it, any of her staff. But my 2 things on this. The first is, and a lot of people have been on boards, you can't just upset a board and start all over. You have knowledge on that board that has to carry through. That's why there's always staggered terms. And so to take and say it's all going to be wiped out, I think there's a danger in that. And then, the second part about this is it's going to set a precedence to where every time there's a new legislature, or maybe, when the governor comes along, are you just going to reshuffle the board? And we can't operate that way either. So this is up, actually, I'm following it, and it's up in House Education. I actually hope to go listen to the testimony on it to see where it's coming from and what issues, if there are any, what are the issues that are causing this?
Thank you. Senator Smith.
I was aware that this wasn't around. This is no chance. I look at no way. I mean, a new group of legislators come in and want to invent a new wheel. And some stuff it's okay, but unless somebody can tell me why it's not working, I just don't get it. I don't, and there's no allowances for a student region either, who are the consumers of the education. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none. That was your final word there, VJ. Short. I saw you had some time left, so I thought I'd give it to you. All right, our next one, they want to know your stance on House Bill 1262, which obstructs a municipal electric's ability to grow, resulting in a significant impact on communities in your district, including Brookings, Volga, Aurora, White, and Big Stone City. And I appreciate the big print. It's easy to read. Who would like to start on that one?
I guess I'll go first on this one.
Okay.
So 1262, just a little bit of background. As you know, we had an interim study over the summer, and I was part of that group. And it progressed through to a framework came out of that. The framework, it fell apart. The IOUs, which are the investor-owned utilities, Excel Energy is an example, they were trying to help out, and they came up with a process. And then that kind of turned into where it did turn into David Anderson's bill, who's really trying to sit in the middle of this and say, can we solve this? He's a problem solver. He really wanted to solve it. By the time it got to committee, which was actually yesterday, I stuck around after session to listen to the committee. It really became, in my opinion, a pro rural electric co-op bill. And the major problem with it is it's going to lengthen the time that it takes. And a good example is going to be Bell Brands. I was doing Bell Brands, and I was here as mayor when we got that done. And if you start to have the ability, and there's an ability in there for the rural electric co-op to sue, the city and say, no, you can't take that area. And it's actually an election to serve. They say that it's a taking, but it's an election. You can't elect to serve that area. Then we're going to go to court. And Al Houghton had a great testimony yesterday on it, where there was a sheet that was given out, when we were applying saying, hey, we'd like Bell to come here. And there's all kinds of things they list about power. There was 10 plus questions about power. And he said we were able just to write them right down because there was certainty on what we could do. We had the Brookings Municipal Utility telling us this is exactly what can be done. And he said if I would have been filling that out and this was in place as a law, I would have had to say to be determined on all of those questions. I couldn't have answered them. And Bell's just going to move on. Any company's just going to move on to the next step. They're going to say, okay, then we're going to go to Idaho. That's who we're competing against. And so you get that one chance. And this could take up to a year to get solved. And the other, what could happen is, and the rural electric co-ops are saying, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to slow down economic development. But there is an amount that's paid to them when an area is elected to serve, and they're going to go along and say, well, I know you want to get this project done, so we want twice as much as it normally is, And so if as a city we really want to get that done, well, guess who's going to end up paying for that extra amount? The consumers of the city that are on the electric service. So this really turned out to be a bad bill. I still credit David Anderson for what he tried to do, but it's one that I'm going to really have to work on. We sure would like to get it defeated in the House.
Any comments? Representative Mills?
I'll throw a quick one in. Last year this was going to be fought in the legislature, and as Representative Reed mentioned, it got put into a summer study session, and we were all hopeful that the two sides would work it out. Because when you come and do battle in the legislature, you might not like the end result. But it looks like that's unfortunately where we are. I'm still hopeful that we'll get eventually to a place where both sides can agree. Senator Wick and I sit in a very difficult spot. We have all three of these entities within our district in strong numbers. We have the rural co-ops, we have several communities that have municipal co-ops, and we have the investor-owned. So for us, it's about an impossible vote, where it's a pretty easy one for the representatives from Brookings to know what they should do. So we're probably especially hopeful that they will find some agreement, and the risk is if they don't, they may not like the taste of the soup.
Thank you. Any
I
other
could
comments?
just piggyback
Senator?
on that real quick. I mean, we, like Representative Mills said, we have 4 co-ops, 2 IOUs, and I believe it's 8 municipal electrics working in our legislative district. You go to places like Volga, they work really well with their co-op. I think it's a well-run municipality, it's a well-run municipal utility, and they have good relations with their co-op right outside of town, and there isn't these kind of problems. Because everybody knows where they're growing and they work together to try and plan for that. And when you get into the Brookings and Watertowns, these big projects show up and they've got to move on them. And I understand the flexibility, and I also understand the co-ops just trying to keep the rates down for their members. And it's a tough place to be when you're sitting in the middle of all of this, but we don't get to vote maybe. So when it comes right down to it, we're going to go with the best argument for both economic development and protecting the rights of our local co-ops, and we'll see what final form the bill gets to if it should get to the Senate.
Senator Smith?
Thanks, Mike. This is the agreement that we're working off of happened in 1975. No one, when Senator John Bibby from Brookings, the late Senator John Bibby from Brookings, was a part of this process, no one could have envisioned that Brookings, South Dakota would grow the way it's grown. Back then, we probably had 13,000 people. Now we've almost doubled that. The university had a little less than 6,000, and we've doubled that. And nobody could have envisioned us moving, especially to the south, the way that we've. And so we are in the bullseye on all of this, and the point that Representative Reed, myself, have, and plus the other legislators from the areas that have municipalities. What we're saying is that we are allowed to provide not only a service, but a lower cost service to the people who are a part of our municipality. That's what we're saying. So we're trying to save money for you. And that's the reason why we're kind of being boneheaded, maybe a little pig-headed, on trying to stay the course and make sure that municipals are able to annex properly, bring people into the service areas. Thank you.
Any other comments? Any other comments?
I'll take an attempt.
Representative Post.
On this issue, I guess there's certain things that are just common sense. Cities get to provide electricity inside their city limits. I come from a long background of rural electrics, and and I'm served by a rural electric, so I mean this affects me that way too. I think there's a combination of ideas here, but I just haven't been in with enough, with the summer study and stuff and keeping up. But there's another bill out there, and correct me if I'm wrong or jump in, about notifications of intent. That's coming through on the Senate side, is that right? And I think in combination with that, it may not be an immediate fix right away, but if the rural electrics know ahead of time, if they were able to see a city's 10-year plan ahead of time, then they would be better able to plan where they're going to put assets, and that would save a lot of the problems that we're seeing. And right now, I think it's just maybe a one-year plan that the cities have to expose. But if that was a 10-year outlook, and then maybe something like this only comes into effect if they deviate from that 10-year plan, would kind of be of a compromise. And then on the other side, the rural electrics they still have that 7-year payout. So we'd get to the point where the rural electrics would have 17 years of planning ahead of time to know, okay, this is an area that we don't need to build up for rural type stuff that's just going to get taken over. And meanwhile, the cities still have all the flexibility to come in and say, these are our citizens inside our jurisdiction and our city limits, so we get to serve them. It's just something that in a few conversations when these bills are being floated, that maybe if we can merge all that together, we would have a solution. But
Senator Smith?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer an amendment. A little
You're out
while
of
ago,
order.
I said boneheaded and pig-headed. I'd like to strike that and say the word strong instead, because I just started thinking about it, and we're not being boneheaded, we're not being pig-headed, we're just being strong in terms of our thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? We'll move on to the next one, which is House Bill 1096. Question is, would you support moving forward with a summer study only rather than outlawing commercial surrogacy entirely before it has been examined? This bill could unwittingly complicate surrogacies even if they are not arranged through an agency. House Bill 1096. Anybody on that bill? Senator or Representative Mills.
I'll start with that one. That has come through the House. This is one of those bills that I struggled with a lot. Right up to the last minute, there was an amendment that would have done a summer study only, and I was in favor of that. This gets into this realm of family decisions, and there's just so many factors and variables in there, and tons of emotion. And I was a little uncomfortable with just slamming down the hammer and shutting off that option for people. But when they did marry the two, I did ultimately vote for the bill with the assurance that there would be a summer study to dig deeper, and if mistakes are made in the law that we would end up passing, there would be an opportunity to correct them, within a 6 or 8 month time period later. So it's a real tough one. I don't envy the senators that now have to think on that issue and make their own decisions. So I guess with that, I would let someone else speak.
Representative Reed.
Thank you. And I guess maybe just for a little background on it, this bill prohibited commercial surrogacy, and so this is what there was a broker that was actually working between a family and a surrogate. That's what it was to stop. Really private relationships, any kind of private thing that's done, it would not have interfered with. I agree with pretty much everything that Representative Mills said, except I ended up voting against it in the end because I didn't like that it just brought the hammer down and said no. I agreed with adding on the study, and then I also voted, and it failed, was to put where it wasn't going to be in effect for a whole nother year. So it would have been July 1st of 2021 instead of the upcoming July 1st time period. So I think we got to go carefully here. I was torn because there are issues with trafficking, and there are some issues with this that needs to be studied and looked at. But when you had somebody, and I looked up in the gallery, and a representative from Aberdeen pointed out, holding their kid, that they were able to get through a service like this. It's like I can't stop that from happening right now because there are a lot of good things happening with it. So that's why I ultimately voted no. But I am happy at least there will be a summer study.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next one. It's the Senate Bill. I believe it's 107. 109, I think it is. Okay. See, I can't read that writing. Apparently, it's healthcare by conscience bill. How do you believe this will affect healthcare across the state? Do you believe this is in contrast to the Hippocratic Oath? Senate Bill 109 provides protections for healthcare decisions governed by conscience. Does anybody have any comments on this particular Senate bill? Give everybody a chance to look that up real quick.
Since nobody's really jumping on this, I'll just say we haven't even heard this in committee. And as somebody who's on the Joint Committee on Appropriations and spends 5 hours a day looking at the budget instead of listening to committee hearings, until it at least gets through committee, I really don't think I've read enough of this bill to comment on it. I'm just trying to give everybody a fair answer here and nod their heads because it hasn't even had a hearing yet. So since none of us, I don't think anybody in this room is on the bill. No. So that's going to be one of those we'll listen to the testimony, I would suppose.
Senator Smith.
For the people in the audience and the people at home, this is one of those moments just to talk about this. At one time in South Dakota, and still there are 3 states this year, they meet every other year. We are absolutely barraged with bills. And it is soup to nuts. It is. And so some of you out there may be intimately familiar with certain bills, and you have opinions. But for us, when you get to look between 500 and 600 items, and we have to do it in a short period of time, plus the fact, and this is big, is that we have the LRC, but we don't have individual staff members. If we were members of Congress and have 12 assistants and say, hey, check in on this and then come back and report to me, that'd be great. But you know who we got for the most part? Ourselves, in our lonely hotel rooms. And we get up early. I have no idea how anybody can ever get into trouble in Pierre. I say that, because I don't know where you can find the time to get into trouble. And because it requires you to be up early. It requires you to respond to emails. It requires you to read bills, especially the bills that you're going to see that morning in committee and that afternoon on the floor. All of this takes time. And so, although we appreciate the opportunity to take a look at this, and for some of us, you're seeing it at the same time that some of us have seen it for the first time. So when people come up to us on the floor, a lobbyist or whatever, and says, hey, what are your feelings about HB 1122? And I'm thinking, wow, Is that the time? I just don't know. Tell me what it's about, and then tell me your thoughts, because that's how it's done. And so, anyway, I apologize, and I know I'm joined by the others. It's very difficult to know the depth of each piece of legislation until it's gone through the committee process, and we hear the things, and then are allowed to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, Representative Reed?
I think the main part of this bill, and just for everybody knowing, what this could be about, this seems to be the main part of it, portion of it. A healthcare provider has the right not to participate in any healthcare service that violates the provider's conscience. A healthcare provider may not be discriminated against if the provider exercises this right. So first thing I'm going to do is start talking to doctors and hospital systems and say, will this interfere with our healthcare? I think that's going to have to be the question that'll be asked on it.
Any other comments? We'll move on to our next question. This one revolves around Senate Bill 70, which is authorize other languages to be used in the process of issuing certain driver's licenses and permits. I know that Senator Smith has already addressed his opening remarks. There are people that want a little bit more background on that. Senator Smith, I'll let you start.
Thanks, Mike. In all fairness, oftentimes credit is given to people that it shouldn't be given to. And my name happens to appear as the prime sponsor of this particular piece of legislation. But the gentleman who brought this to our attention last year, is sitting in the audience, and that's Senator Nessa from Sioux Falls. And he came to me and said, hey, would you mind being the prime sponsor this year? And I jumped at the chance. So he's really the person to thank for pushing this. It's not me. I just know a good idea when I see one. And Michael, way back there, Michael, come on, Michael, there he is, my friend from Ireland. If you go to the Global Dairy outside of Estline, at the time that I visited, there were 21 people who worked there. And it was Michael, who recently came from Ireland. The second in command was a woman from the Netherlands, I believe. Is that correct? And 19 people from south of the border. And I got to tell you, even the tractors hustle there. And I was so impressed with these people that were doing awful work that a lot of other people will not do. And for not only for the benefit of their families, but for the benefit of the communities. And so the Manzers are sitting in the audience, and they've steered me, I've known them for a long time, has steered me in the proper direction. I just think it's a tremendous human act to allow these people to take a driver's exam in the language that they know. Let them show that they're proficient in understanding the laws. And as I shared last week, and I'm going to say it again, is that get their kids to school. Get their kids to school so they can learn English. And then they go home and teach mom and dad English. You talk about a family bonding moment. This one we need to show a little brain and a little bit of heart. A whole lot of heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Anybody else have a comment on that bill?
I'll share a couple because I know you guys talked about this last week and I was sitting in the audience. I share some concerns about assimilation and trying to figure out how are we going to do that. And we have multiple languages now that are spoken in South Dakota, and they tend to be in pockets. We have Sudanese people. We have a group here in the Karen folks. And so are we going to do this in every language? I just have some questions about that. I'll need to listen to the testimony as it came through the Senate, obviously, before I have to vote on it. But I think that's something we have to tackle. When I go to the dairies, like you talked about, Senator, it feels like I'm in a foreign country. And if I was a local kid that grew up here and wanted to take a job there, I would feel like I'm in a foreign country. I think we've got to figure out a way to bring some assimilation to this, and I'm not sure what the answer is. I just have concerns about creating little isolated tribes here and there, and how that might impact us. We need some way to come together. Where are we going to come together? And if we have to wait a whole generation or 2 generations, I don't know how that works for us. So I'm sharing my heart and my concerns, open to the dialogue and listening, but those are some of my concerns on this one.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next one, which is House Bill 1276. 1276 provides a review of occupational regulations, and the questions are basically, what is the problem that it's trying to solve? This has been coming up repeatedly for the last 3 or 4 years. They would like you to discuss your position on protecting the public welfare through professional licensings. Anybody would like to look at that? Senator Wick.
I'm familiar with the sponsor of this. I believe this has been a passion of Representative Latterell from down in the T area for quite a few years. He would like to see less regulation when it comes to the ability of business to take place. I don't know if this is the right vehicle for that. It might be a little bit overreaching, but obviously it hasn't come through much of the process yet. It's scheduled for a hearing in House State Affairs, and they are severely backlogged. But when it gets through, I know in my conversations with Representative Latterell, this has been a push of Americans for Prosperity, and also actually it came up as part of the Ellsworth Authority, is how can we let somebody who's really good at what they do have to get a piece of paper and wait instead of just letting them engage in commerce, and where's the safety and the checks and the balances? And I believe that the sponsors of this bill lean towards getting the business moving faster, and the opponents will be leaning towards making sure that what they're doing is safe and right, and what fits with South Dakota and our existing businesses. And a combination of opening up a little bit of freedom and trying to protect what we have is going to be the struggle of this bill. I happened to talk to the representative the other night when he was playing piano in the rotunda when I finished my work at 9:45 p.m. And I had a very spirited conversation with him about it. And it's going to be interesting as this bill moves through.
Thank you. Any other comments? Representative Reed.
Thank you. I guess one issue is funny. We're talking about commerce, and this is in state affairs, and state affairs is overloaded. So and they've got quite a few people in commerce. So I'm surprised. We keep complaining about state affairs being so overloaded, and it seems like a commerce issue. But we do have to continue to look at occupational licenses, just to make sure that we are making it easy for people to get into their jobs and have a successful career. But that being said, looking through that, this might be overreaching. It's 8 pages worth of changes, and these are the kind of things that are good to do. Oh, here's a place that would help. Here's a place. That's how we've been doing it. The last couple of years, the Ellsworth situation. There's little changes that we've made along the way. So it looks like it's a little too overreaching, but we'll have to take a look at it as it comes.
Any other comments? We'll move on to our next one, which is Senate Bill number 2, filed early. Basically, that allows requires the Department of Social Services to fully support a statewide centralized resource information system. And the question is, are you willing to support funding to bring to 11 statewide? Senator Wick.
Thank you. This moved through our committee. We heard the testimony in the Senate Committee on Appropriations. This is part of our ongoing discussion with a little bit of ongoing funding. We're going to have a lot more discussions, but as crossover day comes up next week, we had to start moving some things through. This, I believe, is going to help some counties that are strapped, offer some mental health and especially suicide prevention services statewide. There was some contention for those of us in rural districts. Most of us are not represented by this and are wondering. I believe it was vetted pretty well. My vice chair in the Senate Appropriations Committee represents all of northwest South Dakota, and by I mean all. I mean, he's got a lot of territory. And he was wondering how calling somebody in Sioux Falls is going to help, and he made a couple of wisecracks. But the sponsors, I think, did a really good job coming back saying that these services are just not available, and they'll do their best to connect with somebody in the region to get the help we need. And South Dakota, unfortunately, is a leader in some things that are wrong, and one of those is our suicide rate. We're not number one, but we don't want to get there. That's not something we want to lead the nation in. And I believe that this is a small and relatively, as our resources go statewide, fairly affordable step. As this is fully implemented, it will cost roughly 85 cents per person in South Dakota per year to have this service available in all the counties and have it state funded. And I think that's something that, at least so far in the Senate, and especially the Senate Appropriations Committee, it is a first step. There are other services available, but this is something we in South Dakota can do, and it's something we decided as a Senate to move forward with.
Representative Reed, I'll go first, and then Senator Smith.
Thank you. And I support this. It came out of the Mental Health Task Force, and what Brookings has used this well. And to answer the gentleman's question, I didn't catch who it was, that was wondering about how can somebody from Sioux Falls know this, know what services are available. Well, when Brookings County got started, they sat down with those folks and they created the database and they figured out what all services were available. And then it just continues. They're always working with them to say what's available. So that's how this 211 works. You couldn't have the workforce unless you're going to have something like this based in Sioux Falls, basically based in a call center. And of course, the biggest thing about it is suicide prevention. It is a suicide prevention line also. So I was really happy to hear that, this is something that is felt by appropriators as being something that's we're able to do and really is cost effective. So I was excited to hear that today. I didn't know how well it has been perceived. So I really hope that it does pass.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thanks, Mike. Just a couple things. Philosophically, I really have a problem with the word "shall" in government. It's an extremely high bar for me to go from may to shall, because it changes the equation. And this is one of those items that has gone to where I like it on shall. It shall be done. Just so you know, because many of you in here probably aren't intimately involved in the people in the legislature, but one of the main sponsors of this happens to be Senator Soholt from Sioux Falls. And I think I can speak for everybody in the Senate that she is one of the most valuable members of the South Dakota State Senate. She is one of those people, when she stands and she speaks, we listen to. And Roberta Olson, she's a proud graduate of South Dakota State University. And she came from the town of Mayville, North Dakota. But in the old days, some of you who are as old as I am remember E.F. Hutton. And when E.F. Hutton speaks, you listen. And so when Senator Soholt talks, I listen. And that alone caught my ear and my eye on this particular legislation. So thank you.
Anybody else with a comment? Representative Post?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would have to add is that this was presented last year and was funded to a 50%. And now we're looking at moving to 100% funding on it, which is fine. But I just would like to add it was presented mostly as a suicide prevention hotline. And there may be some confusion coming up as the feds now, FCC has permitted the use of 988 as a suicide prevention hotline also now. And if that program ever gets funded through the feds, then we're going to have this conflict of how many 3-digit numbers are there that call for what. And so that's just one thing to watch is where this bill is coming through. It's like, okay, now there's just going to be some confusion about that.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next question here. It revolves around Senate Bill 177, which is a caps the increase in the rates of tuition for certain institutions. And I see Representative Post is on that bill as a sponsor. I want to know how you feel about the legislation. Obviously, Senator Post is on it. We'll let him go first. excuse me, Representative Post. I don't want to bring him up. Go ahead, Senator Wick.
This is part of an ongoing discussion. Representative Post and I serve on a work group that deals with Board of Regents issues, and a lot of this discussion will come up and all come to a head on Tuesday. This is a negotiating point, and I don't know how far this is going to go past our Monday meeting. So let me just say that there's a lot of ways to get things done, and this, obviously for reasons in this town, raised an awful lot of attention, let's just say. And for very good reasons. This is something we hear about a lot, and I don't think necessarily this is the answer to control tuition, because it's going to hamstring universities' abilities to keep up with a lot of the things they're forced into, and a lot of the things that actually students want. So this is part of a negotiation that was ongoing, and let's just say there was a carrot and a stick, and I think this was the stick, and we'll see how the negotiations turn out.
Any other comments, Representative
Yeah,
Post?
I would just echo that. I was asked to help step on this as a House prime just so that it had one. And it's negotiating tools, things go through, and trying to balance out both sides. So.
Any other comments? All right, we're going to move on to one that has been tabled in the Senate, Senate Bill 103. Questioner wants you to explain what happened to it, or how can we find info about the popular vote count from the last presidential election. So Senate Bill 103 was tabled February 12th. Senator Wick.
I had a long conversation with the prime sponsor. I'm actually on this bill. There's a growing movement in the country that would basically try to undermine the Electoral College. And I believe if we lose the Electoral College, South Dakota becomes an afterthought nationally. We won't have the ability to do anything to have any say in who's elected president of the United States. There's more people that live in 2 small suburbs of Minneapolis than live in our entire state. This particular bill started in New Hampshire. I don't think it was quite ready, but this is the step that local papers can announce local election results. The Secretary of State can put out rounded results. What this is doing is they're in the particular movement on trying to weaken the Electoral College. They have to have certified election results from the Secretary of State. And this would, I'm trying to think of the right word here, would hold back the certification and the publication of the certified results from the Secretary of State's office until the Electoral College has met. And that part, very contentious. Those of us who talked about this understood. However, it is designed to protect our vote and not have it nationally eroded. A lot of small states are working on ways to strengthen the Electoral College. This was one of them. It wasn't ready for prime time, and the sponsor asked for it to be tabled.
Any other comments? All right, well, this one will be an easy one here, and I think it's an important one. It doesn't actually involve a bill this time. Could you explain crossover days for those who don't know the process? Senator Smith raised his hand first.
I'm going to let the old guys answer that.
Oh, that's your response. Thank you.
Wow.
Well, wait.
Senator Smith points at me as an old guy.
Senator Wick.
Well, since this is my 6th year in the legislature, 2 in the House, and this is my 4th in the Senate, I'll take a crack at this. If you look at our calendar, I'll just bring this up so I get the words correct. Crossover Day is kind of a celebration and borderline funeral for the death of our bills that died in our own chamber. February 27th on our calendar is the last day to pass bills or joint resolutions by the House of Origin and the last day for final introduction of concurrent Senate-House resolutions. So that means any bill that has been sent to the 41st day or to the table in their House of Origin is effectively dead. So like Senate Bill 103, right now somebody could go to the committee it was tabled in, ask for that bill to be removed from the table. 2/3 of the committee could resurrect it and have another hearing on it, or it could be smoked out. Well, no, it couldn't be because it was tabled or withdrawn, actually. And that means that bill will effectively be completely, totally dead in the ground, dead, after the gavel falls at the end of February 27th. These are the days when I was first elected. These are the days they said, this is going to be like the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This is going to be your big day where everybody talks all night, and you're going to be there all night. There's going to be lots of coffee, maybe some pizza, and it's going to be your big legislative day. And my first crossover day ended at 6:30, and I went, really? This is the big deal, huh? So I think it's going to be a long crossover day, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but especially in the House. They've got just a ton of bills they're moving through. Their committees are meeting extra time. I think the Senate had lower bills than normal to begin with, plus we've been able to stagger those through pretty good, and we've been really good at clearing our calendar. So that means our crossover day, I expect us to be there till 5, maybe 5:30. And then we can go start selling popcorn and up in the gallery of the House and sit there for a while. I just say that as a joke, but all in all, that's what crossover day is. All of the bills that died either in committee or on the Senate floor, like my Senate Bill 111 that I got to the Senate floor that we talked about, that will be the day. You'll see a lot of legislators wearing black as just a statement about remorse for all of their good-intentioned bills that died that day.
Representative, read your rebuttal.
So while we do have a lot of bills in the House, we've actually cleared our calendar multiple times. We even dipped into some Senate bills and got them taken care of. Now, do we have a lot coming through the committee? Yeah. So we'll, hopefully, but that's the reason why you have crossover day, is to get your butt in gear and get them taken care of. I think that's one of the reasons, is just to draw that line. But the second, and it's what the senator was saying, is also to stop chaos. Because there's a lot of bills, like the one we just talked about that was tabled, is sitting out there. And you could pick that bill up and you could do what's called a hog house. We're going to get all these terms. You could take and just slap some other bill into it and keep it going. And it would just be mass chaos. So it's just a way of systematically getting rid of bills and be able to complete the people's business in the short amount of time we do.
Any other comments or explanations?
I just had one quick
Representative
tradition that's kind of fun. It's a tradition because a lot of bills are going to die on crossover day, that we all wear black. And so my wife was packing up suits this morning, and she put my black suit in a bag and put a special flag on it so I wouldn't grab it early in the week. So if you're watching on your TV and you see everybody wearing black, that's why.
I didn't know that. Senator Smith.
You know, and it's wearing black in celebration because a lot of stupid things are going away.
And that's the shortest comment you've ever made. Senator Wick.
I was just going to add that because of the John Wick movies, I catch a lot of heat on crossover day wearing all black with the name of John Wick. So it's the only other thing I wanted to add.
All right, we'll move on to another question. We have a little bit of time left. It's House Bill 1218, and that requires responses and reporting regarding the testing, assessment, evaluation, or observation of students. And the question is that when is it going to be calendared? I see that education report came out yesterday out of committee without recommendation as amended. Anybody would like to talk on that one? I think
Since it's in the House, it'll either be Monday or Tuesday. It'll be up for calendaring. So it came out of the committee. The committee was tied. If you're looking through the history of it, the due pass failed 7-7. And so it did not make it through They did not make it with a due pass recommendation coming to the floor. So instead, it comes to the floor without recommendation, which now means you have a two-step process to get it on the calendar. It gives a little tougher of a way onto the calendar since the committee really didn't approve it. And so there'll be a vote that takes a majority of the body to actually calendar it, and then it'll be heard after that on the floor if it's calendared. And so it's just kind of one more little valve in there. Committee work is very important, and we can't get into the details of every single bill while we're out there. We have to rely on our committees. And so the committee voting up or down is very important. And one of the first things I look at when reviewing a bill is, how did it do in committee? What were the issues in committee? Sometimes you even go into the minutes to see who are the proponents, who are the opponents. And so when a bill comes out like this, that's why there's an extra step in getting it calendared. Did it ask for an opinion on the bill too, or just what's going on with it?
You give your opinion.
Okay. I'm just starting to get into this bill, listening. I've heard from some the folks that do these observations, and they're really concerned because they like to do their observations basically with the student not necessarily knowing that they're being observed or being prepared for being observed. And so if we're starting to mess with the process that a professional has, I have some concerns with this bill.
Senator Wick.
Well, if you notice, I'm the Senate Prime on this bill. I was asked to do that actually by somebody here in Brookings. The bill as it started, I think, just is one of those conversation starters, and we've got some amendments done to it. I believe there needs to be a little bit better notification, and I think the amended bill is in much better form than how the bill started, even though I did agree to try and shepherd this through. I think it's got a long slog ahead of it, as most of the education lobbyists and groups have come out very firmly against it. But I think it's got a long road ahead of it, but it's one of those, I think the conversation has started, and that's how you start moving your ideas forward. Maybe the bill wasn't necessarily the right answer, but I think there's some people that weren't being heard that are starting to be listened to, and I think sometimes that is a very good byproduct of failed legislation.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to a couple of questions. One doesn't involve any bills in particular, but they want to know if state employees and teachers will get more than 1% increase in pay this legislative session. Who would like to start on that?
I think the chair of the Appropriations Committee would probably love to share.
Senator Wick, you're on.
Well, yeah, I do serve as chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I believe in discussions with our caucus, within our leadership team, within all the bodies, and including the minority, because I've attended the minority caucus to ask about their priorities and made sure that they're being listened to and are part of our appropriations discussions. And I don't believe that 0 was anybody's first choice of a number. I don't believe it was the governor's first choice of a number. We've had some setbacks in our revenue. The federal government just came through and decided that we can no longer tax the access to the internet. So that part of your phone bill, cable bill, we can't get the sales tax on that. And from a lot of conversations with internet providers, cell phone companies, and everything else, we expect roughly $20 million of revenue to just go away. And then the federal government also decided that people 18, 19, and 20 years old can't buy cigarettes anymore. That's $1.5 million a year that goes away. So we're looking at roughly $22, $23 million that's just gone from our revenue stream. And in a normal year, we see our revenue increase $47 million, roughly. It's the 10-year working average without the half penny figured in. And as you get into that, that doesn't go very far. $47 million is part of a $1.5 billion general fund budget and a $5 billion overall budget. Now, there are a lot of very positive economic signs happening right now. And we were able to go through and using those, we came up with a revenue number that is roughly $19 million higher than what the governor saw coming, because we had 3 more months of really good data. And as that came in, we were able to weed through most of that. Our subcommittee met. I know not everybody was thoroughly impressed with the results. I thought $19 million was an aggressive ask over the already expected $47 million that we normally bring in. I believe that there's a man in this audience who believes that number is far too low, and was very, very, very strong-willed to getting that opinion out there. Now, that means with the $19 million number that subcommittee adopted, I know I'm out of time, but I'm trying to talk as fast as I can to get the thought process out here. We have to pull $1.9 million out of that to keep our 10% reserve going forward. So we're looking at about $17.1 million. We're also continuously looking at cuts. I would really like to thank the good Representative Post for all of his work. He's on 2 work groups looking deeply into every budget to see if there is any fat to trim. South Dakota runs a really, really lean budget, and the 3 agencies, the 3 groups of people we're trying to get increases to are roughly 84.8% of our budget. So there's not a lot of places to pull money from to get those increases. We are looking every day, we are working every day to get those numbers as high as we can, but where we land will be a part of an awful lot of late night discussions and compromises. And there's also some issues with the state health care plan. We've had a lot of struggle in the last 2 years trying to keep that whole. And that is a large part of our compensation package, and we want to make sure we keep that whole and try to hold the employees harmless from increases in that. And I believe that is critically important moving forward, as somebody who's a strong believer in keeping the health care plan sound and available to state employees at the lowest rate possible. So it's a long way of saying we're really working at this. We're going to get to a number that I'm sure not everybody's going to like, but we're going to find a compromise that will balance the budget, will move forward, and will honestly get the most amount of money to all of the crucial services the state offers.
Any other comments? Representative Post?
I guess the only thing that I'd have to add to that is that's where crossover day again is going to be important. So we see how many of these spending bills, we call them bleeders, are left out there to be coming through, because once both houses pass, those are at least they're through one house, then that affects our number, what we've got for revenue to work with and in raising those categories. So,
all right, thank you. We're down to our last question here. Please define local control from our fully Republican panel up here. Who would like to go on that one?
I'll take a stab at it. It has always been my understanding that local control begins with personal responsibility. From there, you go to your family, then up to your church or community, and then your municipality, your county, state, and federal. And that's where it ends.
Senator Smith.
I know what it means, or I think I know what it means, but it's a moving target in the legislature. And people have different ideas what local control means, and so I think obviously I like decisions made in Brookings, South Dakota, and then we go from there.
Thank you. Representative?
I think it's important that communities, school boards, they get to chart their own course. I think that's how I look at local control, just to put it into 2 quick sentences.
Thank you. Representative
I
Mills?
just had an observation. It was really interesting on one of the floor debates this week when both sides of a very hotly debated issue were claiming local control. And I looked over at my seatmate and said, I think legitimately you could claim local control from both sides. And so it is something that can be hard to define.
That's true. Senator Wick?
I think it's, I believe, as an old radio guy, and I know I don't look that old, but I've got a lot of life experience under my belt. I used to broadcast Paul Harvey every day. And when you sit and you listen to Paul Harvey 4 times a day, every day, a few things tend to rub off. And I believe one of the things he always said is, what was it? It's representative government requires responsibility. You cannot have that without the personal responsibility first. So I think this might be some comments about Senate Bill 54, which was one of the hotly contested topics. And I believe, yes, local control is a very viable option for family first, and then up through the local school boards and the local issues on everything. But when it comes down to commerce in the state, we have an interstate commerce nationwide, an interstate commerce clause nationwide to make sure that makes it easy for people to do business across state lines. And there are some issues of intrastate commerce that I believe should make it easier to do business across municipalities and county lines. And that's where that particular issue fell in my mind, and that's why I brought Senate Bill 54.
All right, thank you. Well, this has really been a success. I want to thank the legislators, but before I get to that, I want to thank Dan Nelson for pulling the bills up so you could see them out in the audience. I want to thank Angie for helping organize these questions. Believe it or not, of all the forums I've ever done, this was the first one we got through all the questions, and it was Angie's help. Not only was the organization of the Chamber of Commerce and the Government Relations Committee appreciated for sponsoring the forum, I thank our legislators. We wouldn't have legislation without people who sacrifice time and effort to come up here and answer those questions. With that, I thank you. Our next forum is next week on Saturday, same time, same place only. It'll just be District 7. Thank you all for attending. If it was without you, they wouldn't have questions. So thanks again. We appreciate it. Thanks to legislators. You can see how hard that would be.